Well, Visa, how are you doing
Hey,
today?
I'm good. I'm good. It's a pleasant evening.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on. I really appreciate it. Um,
No
could you give us a brief bio and some of the big things you're interested in?
bio and things that I'm interested in. Well, it's okay. My name is Visa. I'm in Singapore. I'm 31 years old. What am I interested in? A lot of things. I think right now I'm passionate about figuring out how to get a lot of people involved in participating in community spaces and shared narrative building and just trying to organize groups of people to do interesting things together. I think that's my dominant curiosity. And then there's all kinds of things that kind of intersect with that. Like how do you find people? How do you communicate with them? How do you find common ground? How do you get good at all of the things that's involved in that process?
Very cool. Very cool.
Mhm.
What are the key elements there for community building that you've found so far, and how important are kind of great founders or like some key person that brings it all together?
Right. So yeah, it's tricky stuff because I don't want to, I do think that when people say there's like a great man fallacy in that, we do kind of overestimate the role that some individual plays in any great endeavor. There's that, but there's also, I think when you examine any group context or any movement, any organization, I think there are limitations to what people can do in aggregate without like a human shaped persona kind of functioning as a representative, so to speak. So I think people do seem to need like someone to take responsibility, even if it's just transitory, right? Like even if it's just you need it does seem like when there are people who step up and are sort of like the face of things, that makes it easier for other people to coordinate. It seems challenging to have people coordinate around abstractions. Like it seems to be like a human limitation so far. Which isn't to say that it's not possible, but I think when you kind of investigate anything that's happening, there are usually some people who are kind of like holding the torch, and
Right.
yeah,
So there's some kind of Shelling point. You got to have somebody that is kind
seems
of
like it. Yeah.
yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Ingredients wise, what have you
Mhm.
found is really important to community? To me, it seems like they have to have kind of, maybe there's some secret that's different from the outside world, or like there's something. Is there's some main ingredient that's really important? Does there have to be something compelling there?
Yeah, so there usually is a story of some kind. I mean, it depends on how you want to frame it, but like there has to be some reason, some pull, or maybe some push. But it's not something that, well, I can kind of be in two minds about this. It does happen quite naturally. I think people are social creatures, and so they do tend to, in any exchange, people will in the interactions with each other, they will find some kind of common ground in some way, shape, or form. But there's also like a certain entropy of sorts that you have to push against, where so it's kind of like an order versus chaos sort of thing. And if you want to have something going, and the interesting thing is I'm finding that there seem to be uh, similarities across every scale. So even if we don't talk about other people, right, if we just talk about one person trying to do one thing, like you're trying to be a writer, you're trying to write a novel, for example, you need to manage that project. And so project management is another one of my curiosities, and it feels like it's all connected, right? So how do you manage a project? What is a project? And I would define a project as something that requires collaboration between, so a project is anything that an individual cannot accomplish by themselves in a single sitting, right? So if you can do it in a single sitting, it's a task.
Right.
You've accomplished a task. That's great. But if you want to do a project, even if it's just by yourself, you have to collaborate with like your past and future selves. Like you have to work on. So if you have to write some pages today, if you have to write some more pages tomorrow, you do that every day for a few months, and then you have to edit it and like all of that. And to be able to collaborate with your future selves in that way, you have to have some kind of coherent idea, some kind of narrative, some reason for why you're doing it. And this also applies to projects that are larger than one person. So if you want to do work on something together with somebody else, then you have to have, and you may never explicitly articulate these things, but like even a marriage, right? Even a family, like there's some kind of implicit story in why we are together rather than not. And you will invariably encounter kind of contradictions. You'll encounter conflict, forces, external forces that kind of nudge you. Not and it's not necessarily malicious. It could just be like random chaotic noise, random distractions and stuff. So
Right.
the question is like, how do you not get distracted? How do you not get pulled away from the thing that you're trying to do? And that requires investment. It requires reorientation, focus. Yeah.
A lot of ingredients go into it. I like that. Are you married by any chance?
Yeah. 9 years in December.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I'm curious. Do you think is there something about the commitment mechanism that changes the way interactions work within the relationship?
Oh,
Is
for
that
sure.
something you
For
found?
sure. Yeah, so like my wife and I, we were already dating for many years before that, and so it felt like we were pretty much married already. But like the day after you get married, or maybe a few days later, you realize that so getting divorced is something that is kind of costly, like
Right.
whether it's psychologically, socially, like you have to explain to your friends, right? It's just
Right.
more complicated and messy. And so that makes walking away from the relationship more costly. And what will be tempting to do, like what I tell my newlywed friends, like the first time you have a fight as a couple, as a married couple, it will occur to you that you don't actually have to put in a ton of effort to reconcile, because you can, in your mind, you'll be like, they're stuck with me anyway.
Right.
What they, right? And then that's very dangerous.
Yeah.
It may seem plausible in the short run, but in the long run, it's not going to work out. So you have to really put in the effort despite that being easier in a sense, right? And you do see that, I think, in a lot of, and not just marriages, right? Like in a lot of partnerships or even like old friendships and stuff, where people feel like the cost of walking away is very high. And as a result, they might not be happy where they are, but they don't really want to go through the discomfort of renegotiating the relationship. And so they're kind of just grumpy and miserable in place, which is like it's a sad status quo outcome for a lot of people in a lot of contexts. Yeah,
And
which is pretty.
yeah, that's a bad state to be in, and it seems like it's very difficult to get out of because the cost is so high in the short term. Like
Yeah, I
you
think
like
I think that's the case for people who are stuck in jobs that they don't like, but like the cost of leaving the job and finding another job and all that seems overwhelming. And so what they end up doing is they kind of it's like complaining about it is like the exhaust valve for not really dealing with it. And there's like this old joke about how there's a support group for everyone who hates their jobs, and it's called the bar, and we meet every day at
right.
6 or 7 p.m. or something. And yeah, it's funny, but it's also sad. And
It's
it's
really
like,
bad. Yeah.
life is short. We shouldn't be living in contexts that we are not happy in.
Right, right. Well, what does one do, right? If you're stuck in that like this bottom here, and the I guess the energy required to get over the hump. Let's say to leave a job. That's a great example. Do you just have to be kind of irrational and just kind of push through that? How do you think about that?
That's a great question. I would say actually, so I'm not pro grand risks. So I don't
That's
believe in
great.
like, oh, if you don't like, I don't believe like if you don't like your job, just fucking quit, man. Like I
Just
don't
run
think
away. Yeah.
that's not responsible. It's not rational. Like your odds of success are not great.
Right.
So it's almost like you have to. So that it's a project. You have to start a project of, okay, I'm gonna have to figure out where I am. I'm gonna have to figure out where I want to be. I'm gonna it's and I'm writing a book right now called Introspect, and it's like a more general version of all of this. And one of the chapters is called Execute the Jailbreak, which is, so like for a lot of people at some point in their lives, they feel trapped in
Yeah.
whatever circumstances they're in. And it's like, okay, you're in some kind of psychic prison, sure.
Right.
And, there's like social elements to it and whatever. And, if you want to break out of jail, you have to plot the jailbreak, right?
Right.
Like if you've watched like Prison Break or one of those movies or like a
Yeah.
heist movie or whatever, like, yeah, it's like doing a heist. You have to like know the layout. You have to be like, okay, when this happens, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna, like kind of. So maybe if you want to leave your job, you have to start planning for what am I gonna do? Like, am I gonna have a few months? Do I have savings for a few months to? And so in the meantime, while you're kind of plotting your escape, you do have to tolerate whatever you are going through.
Yeah.
But it becomes easier to tolerate when you know why you're tolerating it. You
Right.
know that you have a plan and you're going to follow through with it, and so on.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So it's like having a plan and working toward it and gathering the
Yeah,
resources and just being kind of just have a plan. It seems like having a plan is
yeah.
pretty important.
It can be kind of exciting even. Although I think some people, what they do is they have the illusion of a plan, or they come up with a vague sense of a plan and they hold on to that as like an escapist fantasy, but they never go
Never
very far with
execute on
it.
it.
So that's also kind of tricky. And for some people, maybe that's an equilibrium that they are okay with. Although I feel like we shouldn't be. We should try to be honest with ourselves and figure out what we really want to be doing.
Absolutely. I want to talk about that, figuring
Mhm.
out what we should really be doing. There's this great line in Hamlet where Polonius says, "Be true to oneself," and we're
Mhm.
supposed to be skeptical of this because Polonius is a fool. So, like, what in the play at least, and
Right.
so how does one, how, yeah, how does one go about thinking about these things? It seems just like really difficult.
Yeah, I mean, well, even fools sometimes say the correct things,
Why
right?
things?
And yeah, and so again, this is a very central topic to the book that I'm working on, and I spent a really long time on it because I wasn't satisfied with my original set of answers, which was very
Yeah,
kind of, oh, just think about what you like and then just ask a bunch of questions, and then like it was a very cerebral kind of
yeah,
try to put your feelings through so when I say feelings, I'm already spoilering it, but I don't think it's something that can be solved at like a cerebral level. I think
got it.
that desires and what people want, I think it's very innate. It's emotional, and I've done a bunch of reading to kind of corroborate this. And there's a whole bunch of interesting anecdotes from historical anecdotes from hundreds of years ago. So for a couple of examples, so Martin Luther, right,
Yeah,
the Reformation guy, when he went to the monastery that he went to, he was saying something like, he was just feeling really shitty about himself and about life and everything. And he
yeah,
said to his mentor something like, I have made Christ the jailer of my soul, and I'm such a sinner, I'm such a bad person, and like, I just feel, horrible. And
yeah,
his mentor Johann said, you should that's not how you should live. Like, you shouldn't be flagellating yourself over what is bad. Rather, you should focus on the grace of Christ. Well, so in their case, it's a religious context. So he
yeah,
says the grace, focus on the grace of Christ, and that way you will have a change of heart. And that phrasing really stuck with me, change of heart. And I started looking around more for these phrases. Another example, J.S. Mill, John Stuart Mill,
yeah,
he was raised by his dad to be like a hyper intellectual sort of kid. And his it's kind of creepy and sad in some ways. Like,
yeah.
his dad was a fan of Bentham, who's the
Oh
guy
yeah,
who came
Jeremy
up with
Bentham. Yeah,
the guy who came up with the panopticon. And so J.S. Mill's dad was like, I'm going to raise you separate from other kids, very isolated, very kind of like training to be a child genius, and very much kind of indoctrinated, or kind of, I mean, I don't know how you want to frame it, but like, he was
yeah,
very primed to be very utilitarian, which is like very focused on like what is the greatest good and stuff like that. And J.S. Mill, he was journaling his autobiography or something, and like I think in chapter 5 or something, he says something like, I just feel so despondent, and he was writing to himself, and he said, if I ask myself in my heart of hearts if I could instantly have what I want, which is like a very utilitarian
yeah,
universe, right? Like, if I could remake the world instantly to be trying to optimize for utility, would it make my heart happy? And he said, my heart says no. and then he has like a depression and whatever, and then he eventually comes out of it because by reading poetry. So he said that he was reading the poetry of William Wordsworth, and a couple of others, and he said that there was something about the beauty of what they explored that really spoke to his heart. And like, yeah, once you start looking out for this, you see this over and over again. There's this phrasing of what does the heart want, or like, my heart cannot. And
Right.
I do think that, yeah, there is some kind. I don't know if the language is correct, like in a technical sense. Like maybe it's just a different part of the brain. I don't know. Like I'm not fixated on, it's necessarily embodied. Although if anybody wants to go into like nerdy shit about this, you look up like solar plexus stuff. There's
Oh
something
yeah.
about like emotions being and the psoas muscle. Like when people are kind of traumatized and stuff, there's a lot of muscular tension in that space, and it makes it very difficult to be expressive like physically. And there's like a mind body connection, something there
Yeah.
going on. But I mean, I'm not an expert on these matters. I came at this trying to understand, why, I get a lot of guys in my DMs, guys and girls both. I get people in my DMs kind of saying, oh, I'm kind of miserable and I don't know what
Yeah.
to do. What should I do?
Yeah.
And I used to think that, oh, you got to guide them towards figuring out what they want to do.
Right.
But what I'm now coming around to thinking is that people have, and the amazing thing is, again, you start seeing this in so many stories, even in fairy tales and just Disney movies and stuff. There's this
Yeah.
the hero's journey, right? And so if you follow the hero's journey, which is like symbolic of like an emotional journey, right? It starts out in your village. It's a happy place, the childhood home, idyllic, the family unit, everything's beautiful. And then there's some event or something happens that kind of shatters that illusion, that bubble
Yeah.
of joy and pleasure. It's like something like, maybe there's like dragons attacking the village, or maybe it's like some corruption in the village, and you have to go away from it to go and fix it, right? Like Moana, Frozen, they all have these
Yeah.
same themes. And there's this idea that there's always this sense of like so the child is directed from the heart. They just do whatever they like. They just do
Right.
whatever they love, whatever's fun. And then there's something bad that happens, something consequential. I think in Anna's case, in Elsa's case in Frozen, it's like she has these powers that she doesn't know how to control. And so she's like, oh no, my powers are like damaging to the people around me. And so there's this whole conceal, don't feel, don't let them know,
Right.
blah, blah, blah. And that is now how I'm choosing to interpret that, is that it's like the tyranny of the authoritarian mind over the body, over the feelings, over the heart, right?
Right.
And then the journey that the hero has to go on is, you have to learn how to use your powers, you have to learn how to feel your feelings, and you have to learn how to manage it in a way that is non-damaging, right? And so it's like there's this synthesis of like heart and mind, and there's usually some like major conflict that they have to go through, where they realize that, oh, the way that I'm trying to protect myself is actually, like you're trying to build a fortress to protect your heart, but it becomes like a prison, and then you're miserable. And so you have to kind of break free from that prison, and in a strategic way. So it's like and then you get to get the elixir of life, and you get to go back to the village. And so there's this very nice poetic story that I think really maps onto people's personal lives and experiences, where it's like, it might be your first heartbreak in a relationship, or it might be some, like, you were really earnest and happy to hang out with your friends, and then you said something and it offended someone else, and then they kind of like ostracized you from the group. Like, there's all kinds of
Right.
people have all kinds of dynamics like that. And the challenge of life, it seems to me, is that you have to, you can't just live from your heart completely in an ignorant fashion, because then
Right.
you end up causing yourself and other people hurt. But you have to be careful not to kind of overcorrect on that front. And I think everyone overcorrects a little bit at some point in their lives, right? Like,
Right.
they're just trying to avoid pain. And then that becomes a new source of pain. And then confronting that authoritarian tyrant self is itself painful. And it's like, it can be, for some people have like a dark night of the soul, kind of like emotional collapse kind of thing. But then
Right.
when you rebuild after that, then you have this very integrated, wholesome thing. And I feel like, again, so like I went on a bit of a tangent there, but this personal journey, I think, also reflects outwards into people's interactions with other people. So like how you relate to other people, and what you talk about, and what you focus on, it's all kind of connected, if it makes sense.
Gotcha. No, that makes I really like that explanation. It makes me think a little bit. I really like this thought of like, following your heart and like your feeling, and I do I don't know how to articulate this well, but I really understand that, and it makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
One of the questions I have is and this is pretty difficult, but where do we get our desires from? And can they be valuable or bad at times? And perhaps that's something where your mind and your heart have to kind of interact, and you've got to kind of do the system one, system two thinking thing and
Mm.
evaluate that.
Wait, can you say that again? So you asked where the desires come from and can it be bad? Is it?
Can your desires sometimes be it's like I have you ever read Gerard by any chance?
Yes, mimetic
Yeah,
stuff.
it's Semitic theory. So he has this idea that we a lot of times we get our desires from other people. We copy other people, and that can lead us to conflict with them. Um, so we copy our models. So sometimes we could have desires that are good, that are like from truly inside us, and there's also desires that we get because maybe Visa. I love your Twitter. I want to be just like Visa, and then that leads us into
Yeah.
like mimetic conflict or something weird
Yeah.
like that.
That's tricky. So again, I'm not an expert on this. I'm still kind of figuring it out as I go.
Yeah,
But from my reading and study, the sense that I get is it seems to me that there are some desires that are really innate all the way through,
right.
but it's difficult to know what they are until you go through like this gauntlet of kind of crashing against the desires that you inherit, right? So like so I mean like very young children, they want to impress their parents, and then you get a
Right.
bit older, you're an adolescent, you want to impress your friends, and that's normal. It's normal to care about other people, especially since we are social beings. And
Yeah.
even the language we use, we didn't invent the language that we're using right now. We inherited it from other people, we remix it, and we try and find our own voice. Miles Davis has this quote about how, man, it takes a long time to sound like yourself, and I think that's true. It's really, you for a lot of us, we are almost always speaking other people's thoughts, other people's desires, and so on. And yeah, so I think there's this process of I mean, for the people who want to seek it, there's a process of like introspection and that you have to go through to discern what your more innate desires are. And
Yeah.
there's a bunch of things you can do about that. You can talk to your friends, you can talk to people that who've known you for a long time. There's like you could it's like a whole, and it's like I don't think it's a completable project. I think it's like a thing that you do your whole life. It's like
Right.
you just it's like a proprioception, right? It's like figuring out where you are around other things.
Yeah.
And regarding whether it can be bad, I think the fundamental, simplest kind of layer of desire is it's almost amoral. It's neither good nor bad. It just is. But whether it becomes good or bad depends on how you wield it, how you express it. And different people have different advice depending on what kind of contexts they've been in. So there are some people who are way too disciplined and way too tightly wound that they need to kind of loosen up and let go and just try more things because they're so narrowly constrained. Whereas
Right.
some people are like such free spirits that they aren't thoughtful enough about what other people are going through, and the things that they do kind of have consequences for other people. So this is a very socially mediated kind of thing. There's a line in The Courage to Be Disliked by a couple of Japanese authors. I can never remember their names, but it's based on like Adlerian psychology. And the idea there, one of the strong ideas there, is that all problems are interpersonal problems, meaning,
Interesting.
which can seem kind of extreme, but it's like a lens through which to make sense of things that are wrong. So like if you think that I'm poor, it's because you're relating it to people who are not poor. If you think I'm short, I'm skinny, I'm ugly, whatever it is that you think is a problem,
Yeah.
it's always like if you were the only person on the planet, it wouldn't even occur to you to think in that
Right.
sense. And you can actually investigate. There have been people who have experienced lengthy periods of solitude. So like there's some guy who's like sailing out at sea for like
Yeah.
almost like months and months. There was some guy who was like a hermit living in the forest for years at a time. And what they all report is that when they don't have anyone else to interact with,
Yeah.
their concept of self almost withers away, or it almost just kind of fades into the background, which is that they no longer think about I am this person, I want to do this, I want to do that. Like meaning that all of these I thoughts, they are like scripted roles that we play in relation to other people. So if we just kind of take like a weekend off on our own somewhere it's not enough time to kind of let the self completely wither away. So we still be
Right.
thinking, oh, I'm on a holiday right now, and when I'm done, I want to go back and work on my project, and I want to get a promotion, and I want to meet, I want to find a girlfriend, whatever. Like those thoughts are still kind of socially mediated,
Yeah.
but you have to be out at sea for like 6 months, and then like you're it's like a completely alien experience, and it's interesting just to be aware of that. And yeah, I think there's a humor in it. There's a lightness in it, like realizing that, oh, the life that we're living, we are playing a role. It's a game. All the world's stage and so on. And you see it in, like, if you watch Lion King, like Rafiki, that character is this kind
Yeah.
of cheeky trickster energy, and he's like, "Oh, you've forgotten who you are, and who are you?" And it just kind of messes around with that, and it kind of pointing at the fact that our concept of self is kind of fictitious in a way, and I do think that can give people, if that might drive some people a bit crazy if it's overwhelming. Joseph Campbell has another quote about how the mystic and the psychotic, like a person having a breakdown,
Yeah.
they're both diving into the same sort of inward sea of deep subconsciousness. But the challenge is that the mystic is skilled, like he can swim, he can navigate
Right.
the waters, and whereas the psychotic is drowning and struggling, and he can't make sense of what's going on, the schizophrenic experience. And yeah, that's another thing that I think is very exciting, a little bit scary, but like it's very consequential, and it's like another one of my primary fascinations, like understanding everything, right? Like how,
Right.
how we relate to the world.
God, there's a lot of good stuff to unpack in there. It almost seems like we build our self kind of concept against other people. Like,
Yes.
like our mental model. You talk about
Yeah.
someone going out to sea and being alone and
Yeah.
realizing this
I
kind of
mean,
this
and
space.
when you think about it, it's like, how else would we actually, right? It's
Right.
we and it's always interesting to ask people who are siblings, like you know, like just how their sibling affected their self-concept. Like very often, like a cliche with when there are two sisters, for example, right? It's like somehow the family will be like, oh, this one's the pretty one and this one's the smart one, which is kind of
Right.
kind of cruel, but it
Right.
just happens. And then they might either lean into those roles or they might react against those roles. But either
Right.
way, it kind of it's a very intimate question to ask, because it's like, what was how was your relationship with your family, and your, how did people perceive you? And if you ask it with a kind of genuine curiosity and sympathetic energy, people love to really
Talk
kind of
about it.
open up and share that, because it's so personal, and yet it's not up to them, right? It's like how they were raised, in a sense.
Right. Man. That I have never really thought about that a lot, but that's a really
It's
really
whack.
cool and interesting. It's
Yeah,
wacky
and
wacky
this
point.
this is like a fractal that scales all the way up and all the way down. So like, your ethnicity, your gender, your, like, all these things, you might not have thought about it. Like, I think most guys you talk to casually, they won't be like, oh, I've never thought about what it means to be a guy. But
Right.
you have ideas. We have ideas about, oh, guys don't do this kind of thing, guys do that kind of thing. You're supposed to be this, you're supposed to be that. And yeah, it's just, and same for like people of a certain nationality, people of a certain culture. And it's like, we are each assemblages of all these stories of sorts that we might not think to question. And yeah, it's just, I do feel that, I think there's like a quote about Zen. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different quotes about Zen and meditation and all those things. And they say things like, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water, and after enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Which is like, yeah, so it might be before you question your entire reality, you're living
Right.
your life, and then after you question your entire reality, and in that moment, you might be like, oh my god, what's the meaning of anything? What's the point of whatever? But then
Right.
you kind of come back down, and then you're like, oh, okay, this is my life, and I've inhabited it. And this also reminds me of a tweet I think I once saw where someone said, my sister came up to me and said, hey, we've never been formally introduced. Hi, I'm so. And it's funny, and it's also interesting. Like there's all these ways in which we are born into the middle of stories, and we just never sit down. There's no like there are no rituals and ceremonies for like figuring these things out. And yeah, I think this kind of ties all the way back to the start of like communities and stories and all of those things, where people do need rituals and ceremonies to contextualize things. And even and for some people that might sound very abstract, but like I will always point out that, you know, a wedding, for example, it's the most universally understood ceremony, right? It's like
Right.
there's a couple, they're coming together, their families are there, there's a, you know, there's a priest or whoever is like the community leader, the friends are around, they do a bunch of stuff, they might light candles, or they might, you know, put a ring, and then they say some words, and it's a vows. And what happens is that it's a collective um kind of, so it's a ceremony, and what's the point of a ceremony, right? It's to kind of imbue a moment with meaning, right? and
Right.
and so if it's a very stable and familiar ceremony, nobody's even thinking about that. But like, yeah, so a wedding ring, we understand it as is a talisman, right? Actually, and we recognize it as it's a symbol of a couple's bond. And you know, you might, it's understandable why people have emotional attachments to that, even though it's just an object.
Yeah.
And then the cool thing is extrapolating from that and realizing that you can at any point in time decide to introduce some kind of ceremony for yourself or for your friends, and you can like invent meaning, sort of. And it's not completely arbitrary. It's like there's some amount of cost, some amount of effort, like what you
Right.
put into it is what you get out of it. But just like a lot of people, it doesn't occur to a lot of people that you can make your life more meaningful by like authoring your own ceremonies, which is a very powerful thing to know how to do. Yeah.
It's I love that. I love that. And that leads me to my next question. You know, what kind of role do you think God or religion has in meaning creation?
Mm-hmm. It's a good one. You know, so when I grew up in Singapore, which is a very diverse and space, right? So
Yeah.
it's along a maritime trade route. So there's a lot of different kinds of people. So there's Hindus,
Yeah.
Christians, Muslims. And when I was a child, I remember I used to go to the library a lot, and I was fascinated by Egyptian mythology, Roman mythology, and all these things. And so, you know, I wouldn't say I was ever. So my parents were moderately religious. I wouldn't say they're like devout, but like they're practicing. So they're
Yeah.
practicing Hindu, and so they would bring me to the temple. And there's like, you know, Deepavali is like our annual ceremony, festival of lights. And you know, I've had friends who are like Christian, Buddhist, all of those things. And for me, I never really took it very seriously. Like I could tell that it was meaningful and important to other people, but to
Right.
me, it just all seemed like, oh, it's just, you know, it's kind of like play pretend. And I don't mean that in a dismissive way, you know, because
Right.
when you're a child, you like you have your own games, and those games mean a lot to you, even though it's
Yeah.
imaginary. And yeah, I was I guess initially I just didn't feel strongly for it. And I think when I was a teenager, I discovered some writings about atheism. And at that time I was like, oh, you know, that seems correct to me. And so
Right.
I spent some time being kind of atheist-ish. I mean, yeah, I labeled myself that for a while, but I wasn't like dismissive or like, well, I a little bit maybe. I had a phase. I had a phase where I was kind of dismissive of religious people. But I didn't like it. I didn't like that. I didn't like what happened when I had conversations with people. So like when I started a band with a friend when I was like 17, and I was kind of atheist, and he was very religious. But we both kind of had shared values about a lot of things. We both are like, our community is very important. You know, like we both love the local music scene. We should try to be good people. Like we had all these things in common, and we would have these really long conversations when we take the train from where we live to where our jamming studio was. And I really enjoyed those conversations. And it made me think that I would rather have good conversations with people about all of these things, like what's a meaningful life, how do we be good to each other. I would rather have those conversations than shut myself off from being able to have those conversations by being like, I'm atheist, you're religious, so you're an idiot. And you know, like then we can't have an interesting conversation. And so I've since kind of moved to being more kind of agnostic, I guess. I would say it's like a, so now when people want to talk about religion, I'm like, I'm not sure, which is the truth. Like I'm not sure. I don't know. Tell me your story. Like what's your experience with these things? And I find that the conversations are more interesting that way. And I think that you know, there's this great blog post on Ribbon Farm, I think by Sarah Perry. I'm not sure, entirely sure, but it's called The Essence of Peopling, and it describes how this ties back to like the great man question at the start. It ties back to like how you know, it's like people. So first of all, when you have two people talking to each other, we each have a model of each other in our minds. So I
Right.
model you, you model me. And then inside my model of you is my model of what I think you think about me, which is definitely not correct, right? Like, so we each then, like, we think about each other, and then we think about what the other person thinks of us, and then it kind of it like our interactions are shaped by that. And unless we explicitly, well, you could do it implicitly, but like, like, unless you have a conversation about your respective models, you will end up kind of misunderstanding each other, and it'll be awkward, like
Right.
messy conflict happens there. And then you take that two-person kind of my model of you, your model of me thing, and then you kind of turn it around and you frame it for bigger and bigger ideas. So like a community's idea of the community leader, or like, the all the children's model of dad, or like all the employees model of the boss, and the boss's model of the employees, and so on. And like the what Sarah pointed out was that, like, so then your model of, let's say, like a very important public figure like the president, right, is
Right.
intermediated by the media, and so and by whatever else. And so you approximate what you think about the president based on like what information you receive about him. It's not like you're interacting with him directly. And then from there, she goes on to point out that the mind of God is kind of that intermediated by the priest class, and all of those things. And it was just, I mean, I don't know why I brought that up. It's just interesting to reflect on, in that um, even if a person doesn't materially exist, they can still have an effect on everybody else. And okay, here's an interesting example, right? Take like Steve Jobs, right? He's
Yeah.
passed away like more than 10 years ago. But like, in a sense, the spirit of Steve Jobs is still at Apple, in the sense of, what are all the people at Apple imagining that their founder would want. And it's even if it's also the current CEO is Tim Cook, let's say, and Tim Cook would also have an idea of what would Steve want. Like, so everyone's like, what would Steve? And so in that sense, the imagining of Steve Jobs, and this could be entirely different than what Steve intended, but it's this kind of egregore, this kind of mental image of Steve is still animating the company in some sense, in a very real sense, even though the guy is no longer around. And not to imply that Steve Jobs is God, but like that's kind of that's how I imagine. I think you use that metaphor, and then you think about like how a village might run, and there's like a village founder, and then you expand that into like a city. Athens had Athena, who was like the city of the goddess of the city, and then you just kind of go bigger and bigger, and eventually you get to Abrahamic religions and the idea of like a infinite, one true God, omniscient, omnipotent. And yeah, it's like I can't I don't really have an opinion, like a fixed opinion on whether or not there's some cosmic being, but I know that a lot of people have that kind of idea in their mind. And we know that historically it's been like that. So like 500 years ago or so, if you go to like Western civilization in Europe, for example, it's like everyone basically believed in God, right? Like before the plagues and the Reformations and all those things, like there was a time where everyone believed in God, and that would have informed all of society, right? It informed, like, there's churches, there's a concept of authority, there's concepts of law. It used to be that people didn't do crimes because they were afraid of retribution from divine retribution, right? And I mean, it's more complex than that, but I'm skimming. And so eventually, when Nietzsche wrote God is dead, people always only quote that phrase, but if you read the whole thing, he says God is dead, we have killed him, and like how what are we going to do about it? Like, how do we replace the void of what we have dethroned, right? Like, how are we going to live up to, we have to become gods now, we have to step into that role that we have kind of eliminated. I'm not doing that justice, but there's just the sense that it seems to me that for some reason, I don't know how far back you have to go, it's a human impulse to imagine the unknown, and it's like we are cursed with the knowledge of our own mortality, right? Like, so I don't think that monkeys go around worrying that they're going to die one day. And I mean, I don't know. I don't know what they think. We don't know that elephants and stuff have like graves, so they might, I don't know. Anyway, but like, we know that humans care about what happens after we die. Where do we come from? Why are we here? What's the point? And so whether or not there is a genuine, definite answer to all of that, there is this impulse to kind of look upwards and be like, what's going on, like, and it might be, it might be, when you're a child, your parent is taller than you, and you kind of look up to your dad, like, mom, dad, what's going on, and then you just kind of, it just seems to generalize from there that there must be, and so that your parents, you look up to your parents, maybe your parents look up to like the village chief or whatever, and like, who does the village chief look up to? Like, there's just that kind of like a summation kind of thing, like a abstraction or whatever, and I'm going in very wide detours, but like I was recently so Singapore, every year we have this National Day parade, and it's, I used to be kind of it's so tacky, it's so cringe, it's like all this ceremony, and there's like one guy in the prime minister shows up in like a motorcade, and I'm like, why do we need a motorcade with the prime minister in it? Like, it's so whatever. And now that when I watch it, what I see now is that that's a person who is choosing to inhabit the role for everyone else. And it's like, the motorcade is not for him personally, but it's for the office, right? It's for the representative who is, so he's not literally wearing a crown, but like, I have a crown in my profile picture on Twitter, which is like meant to be a reminder about autonomy and responsibility and sovereignty. And anyway, so if you imagine that the prime minister is wearing a crown, right? The crown is not for him per se. It's that he's the guy in the moment who is kind of carrying the responsibility of everyone else's well-being and everyone else's everything, right? And so people, and I've come to see that to some degree at our present level of consciousness as a species, this seems necessary to some degree. And I feel like maybe conceptually something like a god should exist to I mean, like, so in older times they say things like the king must be God-fearing so that people know that he is not he not a tyrant, like the king must be afraid of someone else. And I think Machiavelli might have said something like that. I'm not sure, but it's just you must be seen to be answerable to something bigger and greater than yourself. And I think that if I were in such a position, and like how I would rationalize it is that you don't necessarily need to imagine that there's a literal person that you're kind of like bowing to, but it's like this personified manifestation of the ideals of the entire community, right? So it's like Athena is a personified representation of the ideals of Athens, right? And when I frame it that way, I find that I can sort of interface with that idea in a way that doesn't make me feel like I'm some fraud, and doesn't make me feel like, oh, I'm pretending that there's a god when I don't really think there is one. It's more of like, okay, like I'm gonna do these ceremonies and do all these things because I respect the community, and the community seems to have that impulse. Yeah, I feel like there may be a more elegant way of saying all of the nonsense that I just said, but I think you get the idea. It's like there's a certain elegance underlying that.
That was really well put. That was really well put, and I think it's an underrated aspect of what I think religion is for most communities. Planning,
and it can go bad. I will say that it can. So it's like what I describe as the shaman's work. Here's a really short, quick story that I saw on Reddit that was really beautiful. Like, somebody was saying, I'm a parent and my child just found out that there's no Santa, and they think that I've lied to them. What do I do? And somebody else said, and this is beautiful, they said, Santa is not, there isn't a guy named Santa, right? But Santa is an idea. Santa is, and the secret is, you now get to join us and you get to be Santa with us. And there is a global network of people who choose to make young children's lives better by giving them gifts and giving them a beautiful story to enjoy. And now you, my child, have graduated from being one of those to receive Santa's gifts to being one of those who gets to give others the pleasure of enjoying Santa, right? And I just think that's it's so much superior to, oh, Santa doesn't exist, you sucker, it's, you get to author meaning for other people, you get to make them feel like they're participating in something meaningful. And similarly, like I feel like a lot of people, when they inherit religion, they don't necessarily think about what I've said earlier, which is like the ideals of the city, ideals of the community, blah, blah, blah. They might just think, oh, I'm born in this context and this is my thing. And like, I worship this, people who don't worship that are bad. And like, there's all of those kind of simplistic ideals. And so it's like there needs to be this ongoing effort from meaning workers, shamans, right? I call them shamans, but you can just call them meaning workers, or what a good priest should be, or a good pastor, or a good community leader, is that they kind of transmute the ugliness of reality, and not deny it, but contextualize it in a way that is meaningful for other people. And it's very, very meaningful work that you can do for people. It's like people feel like, oh, my life is so meaningless, or it's so whatever. And then you can help them craft the story. And it's not fake. You're not making up stuff that's not true, but you're like contextualizing it in a way that makes people feel, oh, okay, my life is meaningful. I'm helping other people. I'm blah blah blah. Yeah.
I think that's I've never quite thought about it that way, but I really like that. I really like that. That's good.
Nice.
I've got this is kind of a left hand turn, but
Mhm.
I'm
Go for it.
curious about it. Planning. How should we think about planning? How important is planning in one's life? And yeah, how do you conceptualize that?
Right. So, to lay my own personal biases out on the table first, I'm not very good at planning in a meticulous minute by minute sort of way. Like I can't stand schedules and calendars, and part
Yeah.
of that is like childhood shit from school. Like I hated going to school and having timetables and stuff. But I've also always wanted to do great things in some sense, like just like just witness cool shit.
Yeah.
And like it goes back to projects, right? Like you don't get to dick around and randomly build a cathedral or randomly
Right.
build a rocket ship. Like those really cool things require concerted effort in a specific way. And so how I think about planning is that for the most part, I think sitting down to make a plan is a great use of any person's time, but I believe that you shouldn't necessarily be completely constrained by any plan that you made at any one point in time. So like the advice I once gave a friend was take a day every month, right? Like once a month, sit down and be like just kind of imagine how would you like to spend the next year of your life? What are some accomplishments that you would like? What are some things you want to see, things you want to do? And then maybe, think of, if you can think about like 5 years out, 10 years out, like just kind of fantasize like what would be nice. And then you write that down in some amount of detail. And then you disregard it entirely and you just ignore it and just do whatever you think is interesting. Because what happens is once you've spent some time to think about it out loud, it will kind of permeate in your subconscious. And then if along the way there's like interesting opportunities and stuff, like you can feel free to just, so it might be like you make a plan to, I'm going to be writing every day. I'm going to every day for the next month.
Yeah.
And then like maybe like 2 weeks in, there's one day where like your friend's like, hey, you want to go to this cool party? And you're like, cool. Like, I'll abandon today because that sounds like an interesting opportunity, especially if, that suggestion might have something to do with something else that you have in mind. But even if it doesn't, some amount of randomness is healthy because you get to open yourself up to new opportunities that you hadn't considered before. But I do think it's worthwhile to, so I think maybe Eisenhower, there's some guy who said something like, plans are priceless and planning is priceless and plans are worthless, right? Because there's all these quotes like, I think Muhammad Ali has a quote that's like, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face,
Right.
right? And it's not bad to have the plan, it's just that when the plan doesn't work, like you should be comfortable discarding it and just kind of trust that the point of planning is it's just to sketch out a rough idea of how things might be. But the moment things deviate from that, like you should be open to surprise and open to opportunity and be willing to renegotiate and reorient. And then you can make another plan at the end of the next month. And then so for me, I like my personal planning cadence is something like, it's not even monthly, it's almost like quarterly, like every 3 to 6 months or so. So like my birthday is in June, so every June I do one big one, and then at the end of the year I always do another big one. And I don't remember all the specifics. Like I can go and check my notes, and sometimes
Yeah.
like years later I'll go back and look at my notes. And the amazing thing is there are things that I made kind of projections about or fantasized about and just had like, it's very vague. It's just, sorry, it's not vague. It's hand wavy, but it's quite precise. So I found like in 2016, I had written something like, it makes sense for me to write and publish an ebook someday. And then I forgot about it almost entirely. But like
That's cool.
it ended up happening later on. And I've talked with a few friends and they all say the same thing, which is like, if you journal about what you would like, what you would want, what you think would be good, and then you forget about it consciously, it still kind of lingers in your subconscious somehow. So it's
Right.
like you have this little magic assistant in your subconscious helping you out.
And it's still driving things. That's a great practice. That's a great practice. What's the Baghdad House of Wisdom, and why is it important?
That House of Wisdom. So that I mean, so people usually say the Library of Alexandria, which is kind of the same thing. It's just
Yeah.
there was some period in time where a bunch of people managed to coordinate to do a lot of learning in a relatively short amount of time. So this was happened in Baghdad during the age of Al Mamun, and he was a sultan, I guess, and it just seems, so I'm still investigating, but it seems like he was someone who valued learning a lot, and so he kind of made it fashionable amongst the aristocracy in Baghdad at the time. It's just like the 800s, it seems. And so like during that time there were like great mathematicians and doctor and like medical doctors, and they made advances in astronomy, in medicine, in math. They invented algebra. Algorithms comes from there. It's like all there was just this period of great flourishing in a short amount of time. And I think eventually they got overrun by like the Mongols. Maybe my history is a bit messy, but like just this idea that a relatively small-ish group of people can come together and accomplish a great deal that then echoes throughout the rest of history. For me, that's something that's very, very exciting. And it's like if you look at human history, the impulse is to think, oh, if you go back to the Stone Age, we didn't really have anything, and now we have a lot of great, cool stuff. And you kind of think, oh, it must have been slow and steady progress throughout. But like, no, like if you zoom in, it's like all of progress. It's like there's like no progress for a long time, and then there's like big, huge leaps. And then it's like, during like the golden age in the Gupta period of India, they invented zero,
Right.
And like, yeah, you can look around like the Renaissance, maybe like, I mean, so some people argue and debate about like how good was the Renaissance for ordinary people, for example. And that's fair. Like it was mostly like a bunch of rich people kind of doing, but like there have been periods of time where rich people were just kind of being degenerate. I mean,
Yeah.
to be dismissive, and they're just kind of spending money and, like, if you look at how oil money in Saudi is spent these
Right.
days, like it's kind of tacky. I mean, that's my value judgment. I don't want to kind of piss anybody off that way. But like, it's just, can we inspire people to use their resources and time and energy to kind of try and coordinate grand projects and not, I mean, not necessarily like grand architecture, although that's also cool, but like just art and science and progress, and if we do it really, really well, if we do it really, really right, like that echoes for the rest of human history. And I think that's the most exciting thing we can do with our time, like on this earth. It's like, so I have this, so the narrative that I have for myself, which is kind of like my personal religion, you could say, right, is that I think that there's something you could describe as the light of human consciousness. And I feel like, Archimedes had it, Al-Khwarizmi had it, like there's this ancient Chinese folks had it, ancient Japanese folks. Like it's not any one ethnicity, it's not any one religion, it's just people who cared about just human flourishing, and they've passed the torch around, so like so during the Baghdad Golden Age, they were translating Aristotle, and Aristotle wasn't really appreciated by, I think, like medieval Christians, because his worldview was kind of not very compatible with Christianity at the time then. But like, so it's like, in my mind, it's like, wow, if you visualize it, it's like there was a light that blossomed in Athens, and then they passed the torch down to Baghdad, and then they passed the torch back, and it's like, wow, it's like everything that we have is like optics, right? When Newton figured out optics, it all kind of ties back. And it really creates this sense of continuity, I think, which a lot of people feel they don't have in modern life. And it's a matter of the story that you tell yourself, right? You can read history and realize that, oh shit, like there's this long unbroken chain, or maybe it broke in some places and we don't know. That's a tragedy, right? Like we don't know what was in the library of this and that, and we don't know what authors and stuff were great and then we never heard from again. But regardless, you can trace back the light of human consciousness torch to torch. It's like really like the Olympic
Yeah.
torch passing, and it goes all the way back to like the dawn of storytelling, like Epic of Gilgamesh 4,000 years ago. And I find that exciting. I find it like, to choose to kind of affiliate ourselves with that kind of non-denominational people who give a shit about the flourishing of humanity. And it's like, so I like the kind of cool phrase I use for myself is like people who are the keepers of the light of human consciousness, right? It's like almost like a secret guild. Like if you've played Assassin's Creed, I think they have this idea of like this this Templar. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different conspiracy theories, and I think the reason that conspiracy theories are so sticky about the Illuminati are ruling the world and whatever, like it's almost exciting. It's kind of exciting and compelling to, even if you're believing it in a negative way, like these bad guys who want to exploit the world or whatever. It's exciting to believe that there's that kind of continuity. And I don't think those things are. I mean, there may be some elements of truth to it, but it's definitely kind of made to be stylized and kind of dramatized to be exciting and compelling. But we can dramatize history for our own uses if it motivates us to do what we love, right? And that's kind of my approach to it. And yeah, I just feel like you can look around in the world today, and there are a lot of people who are smart, thoughtful, and so on, but they feel kind of disenfranchised. They feel like,
Definitely.
what's the point? What's the point of being smart? What's the point of, like, everything's just gonna go to waste anyway? The climate's gonna be horrible. Like, it's just like, yeah, I don't mean to deny any of those things, but wouldn't it be nice if, so even if we have to go out, like, let's go out in like this blaze of glory that
Exactly.
is really, we try our absolute best. And the point, the I in my own sort of moral evaluation of my own life, like, why do I try to be a good person instead of just fucking trying to exploit everyone?
Yeah.
And like, the how I frame that for myself is that it's really about the company, like the people that you hang out with. So we're here for like 80 years, maybe 110 if we're lucky. And like, who do you want to spend your life with? Who do you want at your 90th birthday party, and
Yep.
they've known you for 50 years and they really appreciate you and you appreciate them, and you just feel like it has been a good journey together, right? Like, if you think about like some of your favorite movies, some of your favorite TV shows that go on like 7, 8 seasons, and you invest, you watch, like, even a game, like there's some video games like Final Fantasy 7 or 6 or whatever, like you play
Yeah.
those games, and it's like you invest like 80 hours in it, and you feel that at the end of it, like, wow, it's an honor to have served with you, my fellow,
Right.
even if you're gonna lose, right? It's like that these are my brothers in arms that I fought alongside, and I will die for them. And I think these feelings and values, I think they are pretty universal. Like, it really resonates with us because it's what we want out of life. We want to feel like we matter to people that matter to us. And yeah, so I think that we can make an effort to kind of um, light our own beacons in our own hearts and in our own work, and kind of put out feelers that welcome other people who share the same sort of ideals. And I don't want to be like pushy about it. There's all these ways that things can go wrong. You can promise too much, and then you can kind of be culty, like people thinking that you're going to save the world and stuff. So like, I try to be ambitious, but not promise, like, over promise things to people who might be. So some people are really, really down bad, like really bad,
Yeah.
and when they hear something that sounds like a magic solution to all their problems, they rush into it, and then they get kind of culty and it gets weird and bad. So I want to avoid that. But like, amongst like sensible, thoughtful people, I think most of the people I talk to, they tend to veer on the side of being a little bit too critical of themselves, a little bit too cynical about just how the world's going to turn out, and just kind of sad, kind of grumpy. Like, and like, the media environment is optimized to incentivize that.
Right.
So it's like, whatever people think is neutral, like how you, like, most people, you kind of, if you don't do a lot of self-authorship and you don't do a lot of like careful curation of your narratives, then it's very natural to just kind of by osmosis absorb what's the default media stuff. And you might not even think, oh, I'm gonna listen to the media, and it's just like in the background noise, like, oh, some terrible shit happened there, oh, there's like some political fight there.
Right.
And you just, the background noise of your life, your conscious, just feels like, shit doesn't sound that great. And then you're like, what am I doing? I just get a job and just make some money and just try to have a bit of fun, go on a holiday here and there, and just
Yeah.
Whereas, like, if you could have a narrative that's like, all right, I'm not gonna be able to save the entire world. Like, it's not my job anyway. Like, I'm just gonna do my best. I'm gonna find all the cool people on the planet. I'm gonna make friends with them. I'm gonna encourage them to do whatever they think is exciting, and then we're gonna encourage each other. And like, some of us might end up doing something amazing. A lot of us might just kind of just have a good life, but it's like,
Yeah.
in concert with other people. Like I just feel like that holds, like, there was a fork in the road somewhere there earlier in what I described, and like, I think this fork was just better. It's like more fun, it's more interesting,
Definitely.
exciting. Yeah.
I love that, and I think it's a great call to action to try and do things that are important and find the cool people and help them just within
Yeah.
all of our own lives. Well, Visa, thank you so much for taking the time to come on. Where can people find your work? Where should we send them?
Cheers, man. You can just Google me, I guess. And I post on Twitter a lot. I'm always tweeting every day. I also have a YouTube channel. I have my own website. So if you just type in Visakanv into Google, you'll see you can just pick and choose, like, so choose your own adventure, whatever is your preferred media choice. So if you like listening to podcasts, I do have a list of podcast episodes I've been on my personal website. So you can do that. You can just search Visakan V podcasts, you'll get the result. Yeah.
That's great. I'll put up a link in the show notes. Appreciate it.
Cheers.